Thank you, guys. All right. It's been a while since I actually spoke publicly about the community development work that I was involved with here in Iberia. And it's been, well, I moved here in 2000 and the end of 2010. So, it's been 14 years and there's a lot of work to cover. And I had to try to winnow it down to as little slides as possible. And I'm gonna try not to ramble on about too many things. So, but I broke it down to about 80 slides. So I'm gonna try to move as quickly as I can through the different slides. And but yeah, so my background, I really consider people know me from all sorts of different projects. I'm a gardener. Some people know me as a gardener. Some people know me as the Envision the Berry guy. Some people know me as the show tune sing along guy. But my training, my background is really in architecture and urban design. And urban design is sort of what I consider myself as first and foremost, someone who really thinks about how a community comes together, different systems that come into play when you start to think about how to change something in a community or a city to make it better. And so I went to New York City and Columbia University to study urban design in 2005 and worked in New York City and around the world for a few years before just had some feeling of wanting to come back and to my hometown, to my home neighborhood, and give back in some way and use all the experiences I had from around the world and from my studies to bring to New Iberia and help out with some of the revitalization efforts that were happening. So that's how I wound up back in New Iberia. And I'll talk a little bit more about, am I pointing it in the right direction? Okay. And and so I'm just going to give you a bit of more background on some of the work that preceded the work that came before I came back to New Iberia. So I did some installations with a public artist named Mary Miss. She's based out of New York City, and she's a public artist, and her training is as a sculptor, and she works a lot with land art, and that's sort of what she's become known as, a feminist land artist. And and I was her apprentice for several years in New York City. And during the time when I worked with her, she was going into her 70s already, and she was starting to become more interested in artwork that really engaged with the public in some form, in some way, and with the community in various ways. And one project that we worked on was a installation in New Delhi. And this is a very simple art project that used colored painted PVC pipes uh, and went into a derelict old park in New Delhi and laid out a kind of conceptual garden. So each of these, I'm sorry, the screen's so small, but each of these patterns here has information on a particular medicinal plant with certain Ayurvedic properties. And it really transformed that space as being sort of this abandoned, derelict, kind of unsafe space to becoming a space that to the community that people, young children and women were interested and felt safe walking across from that point. So it's very small, low budget things like that were kind of inspired me to say to myself, like, hey, I have no resources or a big pile of money or anything, but I have my mind, my creativity, and I could do something low budget like that in New Iberia to get something started and get a conversation started about what can happen in New Iberia. Am I supposed to press the cursor? Okay. And so and there were various projects like that in working with her. Next slide, that were in different scales, parks. I did a few competitions where I was just throwing around ideas of urban design and how to engage with the community. Next slide. And okay. And Nope. And we look at things on very many scales, from the very like a park scale all the way to neighborhood scale, city scale, even the regional scale. When we think about urban design and how all these different scales of influences to come to bear at one particular locality in a community. Next slide. So this is sort of my background in New Iberia. My family moved here as Laotian refugee immigrants in the 1980s, and we settled in the West End neighborhood of New Iberia, and this is Hopkins Street. The top picture is a picture of the mix and trailer park which is still there, and I grew up in the third trailer from Hopkins Street, and in the mid 90s, we moved into the house across the street. It became up for sale. My parents bought it. And that's the house that I live in right now. That little arts and crafts, some people say Tudor style, but during that time, you'll notice in the house, on the side of the house there's a sort of field and a fence that's full of vines. All around the house were orchards that my grandparents and my parents and aunts and uncles, and myself, we all sort of helped to maintain. So I kind of grew up in this sort of very landscape cultivating, gardening environment growing up. Next slide. And my family had the Asian market business from 1985 to 2005. And we actually sold many of the vegetables that we grew in the gardens at the store. So that was part of my upbringing, helping my grandparents with watering irrigating all the crops, picking the peppers, picking the herbs. Next slide. And so these are just a few shots of that. It's a picture of my mom and one of our helpers. And there was banana orchards, pepper plants, bushes, bean trellises right here, long bean trellises, a lot of Asian herbs and greens that you wouldn't typically find in your Walmart or Super One. So we had to grow all of that to help sustain not only the food culture of the Asian immigrants in that area, but just to meet that market that wasn't being met by more these American big box stores. Next. And so this is just an aerial view of the corner lot of Hopkins Street and St. Mary. That's the Asia market right there. That's the house I live in there. And this whole corner my family owned. And the orange area is the actual area that was being used for cultivation of crops for the Asia market. So that really gave me a different perspective to how a neighborhood could look like and how a community can look like. That was very atypical from what you would normally see driving down Hopkins Street or any part of New Iberia, really. Next slide. So right around the time I was about to leave to go to New York, this is the 300 block of Hopkins Street. And I grew up on Hopkins Street in the 80s, and I saw buildings that were sort of shuttered and closed down, but it sort of was the remnants of a time that was still prosperous, but I never personally experienced that prosperity myself. But talking to many elders in the community, they would sort of talk about how this community, this part of Hopkins Street, was this thriving district in the city, and there was just so much life and energy and businesses and shops, and it was a great community feeling. I didn't feel that whenever I was growing up on Hopkins Street, but it was interesting to hear about these stories. And I feel like people were trying to reach back and try to get that sense of community back. And when I returned, and right around the end of 2011, these buildings were demolished. They had added the sidewalks and the lampposts, which have just been removed. And right now, only this brick building here still stands, and everything around it is an empty lot. Next slide. So that's sort of the context of what I came back to in New Iberia. And there were a couple organizations and the university that were putting out sort of master plans and thinking about how to you know, from a sort of urban planning perspective, how can we um, make this change happen? And it was a very sort of top-down master plan approach to urban design. It was thinking from a very like, okay, let's just start drawing all of these buildings in these empty lots and see what happens. And next slide. But it was tough for people in the community to really get a grasp of, because we didn't have the resources. The community had been sort of in decline for a couple of decades. And there was sort of an exodus out of this part of the city and the city in general. And you know, the West End, which is shown in the red part there in this sort of this kind of visual infographic, shows sort of the disparity of the West End versus the other parts of the city. And back whenever I arrived in the 2010s, it was kind of, people were feeling the sense of stagnation in the city, like nothing was being developed and nothing new was coming into the area that people could be really excited about. And a lot of people were talking and were moving to other parts or other parishes. Next. And these are just some infographics. Whenever I came back to, initially when I came back to Louisiana, I worked with LSU School of Architecture and developed and did research on the data that was, and doing analysis on the current situation at that time of what was happening in Iberia Parish in New Iberia. So we had sort of economic leakage happening from the parish because there was not many businesses that provide a sort of range of services. People were moving out to spend their income in other parishes, primarily Lafayette and in Youngsville. So they call that retail leakage. So that was happening. Next slide. We were looking at sort of the cultural assets and the points of interest within the community as well. And there were two cultural districts that were designated by the state. One was this area, which is the one that we're in right now, which is the Main Street Historic District. This lighter gray area is the West End Historical District. But when you like Google Maps, like, okay, points of interest in New Iberia, this is what showed. So there's barely anything registered in the West End. And we were just like, why is this not being shown to people? Where's the representation? Where's the visibility? Because we know we have talent in the West End. We know we have history. We have very thriving history. Why isn't it being preserved? And why isn't it registering on these sort of public sites? Next. And also looking at the regional scale, like just the natural attractions we have in the area with the Lake Foss Point and Avery Island, Jefferson Island, and thinking about how these larger regional systems could come into play as well. Next. So that's when the idea of Envision the Berry sort of arose, right? How can we see the berry, New Iberia, as a what's the future going to look like for Envision Berry? How can we envision it as a thriving place that celebrates its diversity, celebrates all of its assets, all of its people, and and uh, and then encourage people to stay here and thrive. Next slide. So the sort of next, as I was thinking about, okay, what would be my first project or move in New Iberia as an artist? I was looking, this is post-Katrina, and was looking at some of the installations that had done post-Katrina in the wards over there. And this was an installation that was headed up by Brad Pitt. And it was sort of these pink boxes that represented the homes that were displaced and moved out of those neighborhoods that flooded. Next slide. And it was a very architectural based kind of intervention, artistic intervention, which was sort of my jam. So I was like, okay, let me look into precedents and case studies in that level. So Envision the Berry. So what would the installation do? How can we take a small period of time, 5 weeks, and create an installation that would explore community spaces in New Iberia, think about how we plan those and get the community involved over a season, and then how that small temporary installation can make a larger impact over several years. So this is sort of like the 5 years goals, and I had very ambitious goals at the time. We wanted a big regional transit system in 2015, which didn't happen. But maybe we should put a zero there. It should be more like 50-year goals instead. Because I learned very quickly that things move very slowly in this part of the state. Next slide. So the idea was, okay, how can we just create these temporary community spaces that focused on various themes in that people in the community had already voiced that they were interested in seeing, that they wanted, because at this point there were like 4 organizations already that came in and said like, oh, we want to revitalize, and we want to help, and here's a master plan, and they gave the people, the neighborhood, a master plan, and we didn't see anything happen. So I felt that our approach that could be more digestible for people, more interactive, more engaging in a very real way where people can actually see and experience it. And it was very performative, would be sort of the way to go. I was trying to be the anti-master plan urban designer and be more grassroots. Next. So we looked at 5 different themes, and during 5 weeks, and each week we would move down to a different site along Hopkins Street and do a pop-up installation for that week. And next slide. So one week we'd go to an empty lot. This is the old Johnston Hopkins Elementary School yard, and pop up a community garden in that space. Next slide. And we laid out the schedule on these sort of brochures and told people of all the different activities that would happen during that week in each of these installations, and then showed them how they can become involved. Next slide. So this was the first week, and we took some PVC pipes and some Tyvek fabric and just made a pop-up garden, community garden in the parking lot of St. Francis Diner. Next slide. And made sort of fake fruit trees. And it was more sort of conceptual, and it was about trying to get a conversation started. Next slide. And the next week we did a pop-up market. Next slide. So these were the previous slide was the initial concept sketch, and this is what the installation wound up looking like for week 2. Next slide. And we had like a pop-up market and the fashion show, and highlighted the vendor products. And at this point, we didn't have the Berry Fresh Market. We didn't have any sort of farmers markets down on Hopkins Street. Next slide. This is we took at the end of each week, we would take the PVC pipes apart, and it was sort of like Legos or Connects or an erector set, and we just make it into a different form and focus on a different theme for the week. So the third week was art and entertainment, and we did a pop-up art gallery. Next. And it had concerts, and we invited musicians and singers and dancers, talents from the neighborhood to come and showcase their talents. And there was quite a few people that came by and did that. Next. Week 4 was culture, and this was sort of designed to be more like a exchange museum sort of space, but it sort of sat empty that week, and because it was hard to find in that amount of time just people with cultural products that could be placed in this kind of setting. Next. And then the last week was about green transit, and we took all the PVC pipes and made benches and bike racks out of them. Next. So during those 5 weeks, the engagement process was really important, very fulfilling, and we wanted to keep the conversation going, and begin creating partnerships and build a coalition of stakeholders around each of these subjects. Next. And so we met with, elected officials, government and nonprofit organizations, and just regular folks in the community that had something to say about any particular theme, whether it was housing, whether it was education, commerce, or environmental or health and wellness. Next. Next one. And, I think a big part of Envision the Berry's work was really creating a brand, a new kind of brand around New Iberia, because at that time, the conversations around New Iberia, and still to a large some degree, was there was a lot of cynicism about the community, about the city, and a lot of pessimism about the leadership and that sort of thing. So we wanted to begin reconstructing a narrative that was built around positivity and built about sort of inclusivity and bringing people together to work together to make things happen in the community. So we created a website and social media pages next, flyers and brochures next, to continue those conversations. Next slide. And started engaging people in more public ways in public events like parades and different festivals next. And just looking at what do we want it to do, just get the community more involved, and just start to see in the West End a sort of economic upturn that may be a very long-term sort of thing. Next. And these are very sort of complicated drawings, but we were looking at each of these colors here represent a different kind of theme, right? So there's health and wellness, commerce, arts, culture, transportation, and we added education and housing to it. And so our sort of strategy for Envision the Berry as an organization was to look at these different areas and just find little ways that we can start moving things forward in each of those sectors. Next. And so we did like small performance sort of spaces like this, show tune sing along, which was a very popular one. Anyone ever went to a show tune sing along here? Yes. Really fun. So that went on for like 5 years, and we just had like live piano music, and people just gathered in that spaces, and it was so fun, and it activated downtown on nights and in spots that wouldn't normally be activated, and brought attention to our main street. Next. Doing murals was another big part of our project as well. And through the work of murals, it's a really amazing way to, I think, rebrand a city and sort of retell through artwork what a neighborhood is about, retell their history, like the history of Bunk Johnson, retell the history and culture of Hopkins Street and its club scene and nightlife back in the day through these sort of murals. Next. Doing galleries, art galleries next. Window Wonderland that Adam had mentioned in the intro, to activate Main Street and the downtown businesses that just were sitting empty during the holiday season next. And so each of those themes and those sectors of the community, Envision the Berry had various projects that sort of spun off from the initial installation that we created and the conversations that came from that. Next. All right, so finally to the garden. I just felt it was important to lead you guys through sort of all that backdrop and the work that it took to even just get to this point. So the Iberia Community Garden, which is now the Iberia Market Garden, has been in existence for 10 years now. We just made 10 years this year. And the initial funds and grants that came to create this project came through the Iberia Parish Foundation. And the objective of those grants were to help with economic development in areas that were affected by the BP oil spill. So that was sort of the initial grant funds. But then shortly after we received those initial funds to get our first greenhouse built, we then had an opportunity through the Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation, which was a much larger, like $500,000 grant to do more across the whole parish. So the gardens, expanding the gardens was a part of it, and they did other things like voucher programs in the West End. They did gardens in Jeanerette as well, and seafood market. The Delcombe Seafood Market was also a beneficiary of that as well. Next. So the Iberia Community Garden sits on my family's private lot. We sort of agreed to be the steward for this garden in perpetuity, I guess. Next. And so there's two greenhouses that sit on the property currently. We started with the initial greenhouse with this vertical hydroponic system. The Blue Cross grant allowed us to expand into a larger greenhouse, and we also were able over time to create beds and in-ground rows and stuff to increase our capacities. Next. Um, so this is how it looks. It would look like in the sort of the high season in like early spring, I would say. And we were growing a lot of salad mix in these towers. And at first, it was hard to get people to like fresh vegetables. And we had to really define different ways to present it to the community that would make it more palpable because people here we like our smothered this and smothered greens and everything. So fresh food is not sort of like the initial go-to for many people in our community. But we've been working on changing that perspective. Next. So another part of the grant was to have these sort of individual towers that were self-contained and that there's a water tank in the bottom and it would circulate nutrient water and grow plants. And people could just plug that into in front of their house or in their sunroom or something. Next. We opened the garden up to volunteers and tried to work out a system that would be fair and sort of enticing for people. It's hard to get people to come and just spend time working basically. But what we figured out is that the exchange rate for vegetables is something people would enjoy. So they put in an hour and they get a pound of vegetables for every hour that they put in. Right now we do 2 pounds of vegetables for every hour that's put in, which is a lot when you actually gather vegetables together. Next. Yeah, so this was some of our brochures that went out to the community. Next. And yeah, people came out and helped out in the garden, working on various tasks. And I sort of helped with managing the volunteers and just guiding them through the gardening process and educating them on just basic gardening. Next. It was really fun. And just next, the exchange between the different members of the community was such a delight to see as well, because we really got a diversity of people from across the city that were interested in coming and just seeing what the garden was all about. And then we'd have these sort of pop-up farmers markets too. We did one at the garden like this one next. And people would come with their vouchers that they received through the grant funds and go to the stand and pick up their vegetables. And this was a nice tent that was designed especially for us that allowed us to give information about each of the vegetables and begin educating people about the vegetables and what their benefits were. Next. And these are just some nice images of some of the markets. You just scroll through these. And we also had opportunities for school trips to come in. A celebrity, national celebrity came to our garden to support it. We engaged with the local Boys and Girls Club and any sort of youth activity that we can. We also bring in interns, and these 2 interns are from France there, and they were working with the local school at the garden. We also started to have these sort of spin-off projects from the initial garden and found some additional funds to create a small community garden in a public housing here in Iberia. And this is how that looked like. Next. And so after a few years of working on the community garden and building up our capacities for growing vegetables, and a private investor came to us and wanted to see it sort of get bigger, make a bigger impact in the community, and offered to invest in purchasing a property for us and some startup funds to create a permanent market space. And this is how the Berry Fresh Market came into existence. This was the original building, how it looked initially. And this was a sketch of how we wanted it to sort of become. Next. We got a lot of like university school groups that traveled from places like Arcadia University. I think that's in Pennsylvania. And church groups that came to assist and offer the labor to make this space, turn this space into what it is today. Next. And this is where the initial Iberia Community Garden sits. This is the Berry Fresh Market. That's the garden and public housing. And then we had sort of two lots that were leased to us for $1 by Habitat for Humanity so that we could increase our growing capacity. So we grew like okra and watermelons and sort of low maintenance crops out there on those lots. Next. Sort of an idea of how the market looks like inside now. Next. And Carl Cooper Jr. now runs the market over there. He really took the project into and really made it into his own and made it into a space that's really, I think, a kind of new cultural hub for the African American community in the West End and in the city in general. And this all started with planting seeds in a community garden. So we're really had this wonderful space. And, it's still an area of the city that has a lot of poverty issues with it. And so there's a lot of people that go to this space and use it as a safe space and as a positive space to really retreat from whatever they're going through. They contribute in the garden and get a higher sense of esteem from engaging with the activities at the market. And whenever we do need things like tools, and like some of our volunteers didn't have like shoes to work in the garden, like proper shoes to work in the garden with, we were able to reach out to the people in the community and fulfill those needs. So it was a very wonderful space and a great after-school space for young people that wanted just a safe space to hang out to. And the Berry Fresh Market was really at a moment a couple of years ago was in sort of the hotbed of a lot of violent activity, and it was such a positive light in the middle of all of the negative that was happening at that time. So spaces like this are just super important to community development and to economic development as well. And I have a slide that will talk a little bit more about that. So yeah, more activities like this, school trips, is so much fun, And this is like that slide where the paper wrote about safer streets and easier sell in terms of economic development for the city. When we have spaces like the Berry Fresh Market, it's in a neighborhood that's been sort of downtrodden for a while. It really starts to shift the energy of the place and start to turn things around. And so we're starting to see a lot more of that ripple effect slowly but surely, I think. And with the hard work of Carl and the gardeners and volunteers there, they're doing amazing work. You guys might have heard of my sort of initial foray into politics. So when I moved back to New Iberia, it was for a 10-year commitment initially, and I was just going to volunteer my time. And then after that 10 years, I was going to focus on more personal life and my family. And that 10 years ended in right before the pandemic, actually, in 2020. And I stepped away, and the organization, Envision the Berry, sort of closed down as an organization. And we kind of were just sort of watching. I was just sort of watching what was happening in the city. And there wasn't, in my view, not much envisioning happening, which I felt was still very important to the process of New Iberia. So I felt through policy and through having the platform of running on for a state senate campaign, it would allow me a platform to talk about these things from a policy standpoint. Next slide. But I used it, I approached it my campaign in a way that was more urban designery and not sort of like as a politician would. which is probably why I lost, but among other reasons. But just how can we start looking at policies? Because it matters where the funds in our state and our public funds go to, and how they get channeled, and if they go to projects like community gardens and economic development and small businesses in more low income neighborhoods. Um, these things are very important for our politicians, our elected leaders to know about. And I felt like the big reason why I entered the race because I felt no one was representing that part of the low income community in the conversation. So so I entered the race and started talking about, green policies that would talk about bringing green jobs, what sort of industries could come in, biogas, the recycling plants, sustainable agriculture, and, more public transportation, investments in school gardens, school farms, that sort of thing. And, it's a really exciting time in New Iberia right now, too, because we have that solar panel manufacturing plant that's coming that's bringing like $1 billion of investment into our area, and also the plant in Generette that's using bagasse and turning that into fuel pellets. So I felt like this right now we're really having these conversations about sustainability and how can we reuse things in our environment and be more environmentally conscious. Next. And so just thinking more on a regional scale, this is Westgate High School, Jefferson Island Road, Hopkins Street, Admiral Doyle here, and just thinking about this area as sort of this new green zone where like a big school farm can occur. Uh, is also like a sort of farm park where there could be bike trails and recreational trails that sort of circulate around and tie into the Pepperplex that's right here. And I actually worked with Mary Miss on an installation on a wastewater treatment plant, and you could also use the wastewater treatment plant as artwork as well. And yeah, and also thinking about the schools and how we can begin training, do vocational training and fast tracking opportunities for young people in the community to prepare themselves for these new incoming green jobs that are coming to the region and to the area. Next. And so, yeah, just looking at how we can invest in small businesses like the Berry Fresh Market in these kinds of communities. Next. And, transforming these old derelict spaces that are pretty much abandoned in the city into something useful through public and private investments like a transportation center. So these were things that I was talking about on my campaign trail. And that's something I think would be maybe 40 years down the line for this part of for Iberia Parish. But I mean, we're getting this amazing factory, so that's a huge leap, and who knows the scale of the boom to our economy that we'll receive. Next, opening up cannabis and marijuana policies could be a possibility. Next, investing into housing, green housing, and reinvigorating our housing stock, rebuilding our housing stock in New Iberia. Next, bringing more green energy, diversifying our energy resources. Next. And so it additionally starts with gardening, and what a garden can lead to is markets leading to certain permanent brick and mortar spaces in the community that not only serve as economic spaces, but also community spaces, social spaces, cultural spaces for our neighborhoods. So that's, I think, is that the last slide? That's the last slide. So we like to see more spaces like this that are talk about gardening, talk about our community and show our community in a sort of positive light and a healthy light. So that concludes my presentation on community gardens. So I'm open to questions if anyone has any.
Is the Iberia open now?
It is
Fresh market? I mean,
like, and that is our, it's open on Wednesday to Sunday.
And is all of the produce there from the community gardens?
Not all of it. So there's three ways that we distribute our produce from the community, from the Iberia Community Garden. One is we'll send part of it to the Berry Fresh Market if we have any available. We have a CSA program, which is a community-supported agriculture subscription. So people will pay $200 upfront for a 8-week subscription of weekly vegetable deliveries.
Who distributes that?
We do, or I do, or someone at the someone at the garden. We don't have one currently active at the moment, but at our peak point, we had about 25, 30 subscribers, and that's on a 1/4 acre lot. That was as much as we could handle. And also we help supply Scratch Farm Kitchen, which is a farm-to-table restaurant in Lafayette, and they're very good.
Hydroponic year-round growing?
Except in the very hottest part of the summer. So in July to mid-September, we shut down because the water costs of running it are too high. And it's just like we're fighting, because we're also an organic operation. We're fighting a lot of bugs and disease at that time too. It's just we learned over the years that it's just better to shut it down during that time. The hydroponic aspect, but we still grow like okra and those more summer crops.
Is it mostly the leafy vegetables for the hydroponic?
Yes, it's leafy vegetables. I would say is like half. A 1/4 of it is sort of like herbs and then another 1/4 I would say is about beans, just bush beans.
How much success did y'all see with the home, essentially home hydroponics stands? Like, that's a really interesting idea. I hadn't really thought about that.
Yeah, I think initially there was a lot of excitement built around it, but I think people started running into technical problems that they couldn't handle, like, oh, the pump was clogged and they couldn't fix it. And after the grant was done, there was no one around to manage it anymore, And so I think the Iberia Community Garden, it survived just because I was personally so invested into it, and it was in my backyard. So I became a steward for it. So with any project, you got to have a steward that's going to be dedicated in the long term to keeping it alive and growing. Mm-hmm. Yes. Hi, Bob.
So you dedicated 10 years, and it's been 5 years. It's 4 or 5 years since the end of your dedicated 10 years. And so what's your lessons learned? If you had a do-over, if you had a restart, like what do you think you tried to do too much? Would you focus? I mean, what was your winners in experiment or your journey?
Oh yeah, great question. Yeah, because there was a lot of lessons, right? And you have to fail a lot to be able to I think eventually succeed a success and learn things and become better. The failing was definitely part of it. Let me think. If something I could do differently over the past 10, 12 years, I would. That's tough. Oh.
Well, let me ask this question, because a lot of it was focused on gardening and community gardening. Economically, can the crops make money? Is it a sustainable thing to where it can sustain itself through buying and selling through the markets of other markets, to where you can duplicate what you're doing to get more? I mean, it has to be funded.
Yes.
Can it self-fund itself in your opinion?
Yes, I think some of the initial slides that we talked about with the Asia market case study, where we were using the vegetables as a way to offer a more diversity of products within that within the Asia market. But it was a draw for many people in the Asian community to come and like, oh, I need my fresh mint, my fresh basil, my beans for my particular Laotian soup that I'm making. And while they're there, there's a variety of other products that's being offered as well. I got to get my 50-pound sack of rice. I got to get my all of my seasonings, my dry seasonings and canned goods and stuff. So I think diversity is important to offer in any business and any approach. And I think that's part of why the Envision the Berry approach was so sort of holistic in its scope, right? We're looking at all of we're not just focused on housing, we're not just focused on health and wellness. At the end of the 10-year period was finally when it became the garden became self-sustainable. And then I had to be like, okay, time's up, guys, it's time for me to go. You know, because my family's in the plant nursery business in Central Louisiana, and they were being very, very patient with me because and they needed my assistance up there. They're like, "Are you done with all that? Okay, why don't you come and help us out?" And it's a lot more lucrative. But I feel confident in saying that if I could dedicate full time into gardening and the setup that I have at the Iberia Community Garden, that it would be profitable and to have at least two employees be gainfully employed. We wouldn't be making like a high salary or anything, but yeah, it'd be something pretty, I think, doable.
So, Phanat, we have a question from online from one
Hi.
of our viewers.
Hello, viewers online. Thank you for joining.
Says that you are inspiring and this all sounds exhausting. What's next for you? Do you plan on running for office again?
That is still up in the air. We'll see. I'm hoping that we have a candidate that steps up and talks about all of those great things that I just talked about in the end of that presentation. But right now, I'm not even thinking about any sort of run, any other political run. Yeah.
Did the community participation increase or decrease as the years went on?
It fluctuated. We started during the grant, which was like a sort of 2-year cycle. There was much more outreach, much more resources to actually pay someone to help guide volunteers. So that helped. But then after that, we sort of were running into sort of timing issues, scheduling issues of keep getting people there. And
Is Carl continuing some of that?
yes, Carl, and the Berry Fresh Market operation is a completely separate operation, and he opens normal business hours. So it's open to the public so that people can go there. Yeah.
Your seed.
Absolutely.
It's ongoing.
Absolutely. Yes.
Ted losing here.
Yeah. So with Iberia Market Garden, we had to scale back because of my personal commitments, and I couldn't be on site all the time. We scaled back the community engagement aspect, but we send everyone down to the Berry Fresh Market, which is more open and more public now.
Engagement stuff is the most important stuff right now.
Yeah.
Here.
I think the social interaction and the cultural exchanges that happen in all these spaces that were presented were some of the most valuable, intangible, but valuable and hard to quantify things for developers. It's just a sense you pull when you travel through a community.
And it is a sense you get.
Right.
Really pointed out.
Right. Like if some developers, they may look at the numbers, but some might have to go through a neighborhood and be like, I really love the feeling of this community, the energy of the place. And that energy was something that part of the magic of Envision the Berry. The magic of Phanat. Yes. Any more questions? Yes.
do you ever think of not just growing vegetables, but fruit garden, or is it too much landlocked?
We're pretty landlocked, and also just the quality of our land being in the middle of this part of the city, and our lots are not really conducive to tree growth.
Just figs, some
Mhm.
peach trees, and
Yeah.
muscadine all grows pretty
Yeah.
well, right? in South
We
Louisiana.
do,
I just thought
and
maybe you had a few trees.
we do have a few trees growing. They're still on the young side, but I've been using my political campaign posters to build little greenhouses around them during the freeze, actually. So lives on. And but yes, we're sort of limited with doing a nice size orchard, but we do have like 2 varieties of each kind of like figs, and of each variety of fig that does well here, and some citrus. Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
maybe not so much a question, it's just like a thing, like, not like, when you first started this whole community garden thing, and my cousin Jared next door ended up, like, I think it was his wife had gone to work with you, and they had gotten 4 of the vertical gardening things, and I think if you don't remember, but I had called you asking how I could purchase or get access to those, and still to this day, I kind of wonder, because with very nominal, like whatever, they set it up in the backyard and they're right next door, and I would watch, and they would, and they would hardly do anything, but I would watch the most beautiful, like kale and spinach, and come bring me big bundles, and sometimes I just sneak back there and snip some anyway, because it was just letting it all just,
Yes.
kind of go, and it's all, and now the whole setup, because the wife is gone, it's just him, whatever, it's just laying there on the ground. And I think, and I always kind of, when I said, God, if Phanat was like, do this like community classes, like, okay, you can come, pay so much, and
Yeah.
you get like a setup, and then you give us like instructions.
Yeah.
and-
Well, it was a lot of work, to keep up any garden. In the summertime, it's full of weeds, and so yeah, you just have to it can be a lot of work, and you just have to pace yourself. And with the garden, and its big operation, we especially during this time, we're signed up for WWOOF, WWOOF, which is Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms, and I host young people that come and help out and volunteer at the garden in exchange for room and board. And it's a sort of a cultural exchange project. I have two young people from Massachusetts arriving tomorrow. A lot of snowbirds that want to come down here during the winter and help out in the garden. So it's a great time too, because it's right in the beginning of our growing season, and it gets us on it like jumpstarts our spring growing season. They get all the weeds out of the way, they fill all the pots, they plant all the seeds, and then it's a pretty low maintenance system after that. And then when it gets hot, that's when all the weeds come up, and then you kind of need like an extra set of hands just to help maintain that.
Yeah, 'cause
But-
that's what I had observed,
Mhm.
is that like, okay, I don't ever see them out there.
Yeah. So current. Yeah.
Vegetable coming out of these things.
And currently at the Iberia Market Garden, we have like three volunteers that come on a weekly basis for 3 hours each time. So like 3 people, 6 hours a week working in the garden just to keep up with the harvest and maintaining things. Yes. All right. I think it's a good time to stop because we're out of time. Thank y'all so much for coming out tonight. I hope y'all got something.